CEO denied withdrawal at her own bank by rude employees. She makes them regret it instantly. Victoria Langford, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms and splashed across financial headlines, had built her banking empire from the ground up. Today, she wore no tailored suit, no polished heels, no name badge announcing her stature, just a comfortable knit sweater, jeans, and a tote bag slung over her shoulder. It was a conscious choice, a habit she developed over the years to remind herself what it felt like to walk through the world as an ordinary person. At 8:45 a.m., just before the official opening hours, she stepped into her own bank's midtown branch, a location she hadn't visited in person in over 2 years, though it was technically the flagship branch. The lobby was quiet except for the soft hum of printers and the muffled voices of staff preparing for the day. She'd come for a large cash withdrawal, a rare request she needed handled discreetly for a sensitive, confidential investment opportunity involving a foreign tech startup. She could have sent someone, sure, but this deal required her personal oversight. Unfortunately, what was meant to be a simple transaction quickly turned into a surreal descent into condescension, accusation, and absurdity. The teller, a young woman named Marcy, barely glanced at Victoria when she approached the counter. Her eyes flicked over Victoria's attire and tote bag, then returned to the monitor with an expression that hovered between boredom and suspicion. "We're not open for another 15 minutes, she said, not rudely, but with the weary tone of someone who had recited the same line too many times. Victoria, always patient, smiled warmly and said, "I understand, but I'm here on bank business. I need to speak with the branch manager, please." The moment the words left her mouth, the atmosphere shifted. Marcy raised an eyebrow and gave a slight, incredulous chuckle. "Ma'am, unless you have an appointment or an ID badge, I can't let you pass this point." Victoria nodded calmly and pulled out her ID and a secondary verification card, standard protocol for executives handling sensitive assets. Marcy squinted at the card and snorted. "This is a fake. Come on, you really think I'm gonna fall for a phony CEO ID?" Victoria blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone still even. "That's a corporate-issued ID. I'm Victoria Langford. This is my bank." The words were meant to clarify, but instead they drew a laugh from another teller, a man named Keith, who'd overheard the exchange. "Oh, wow," Keith said, stepping closer with a smirk. "She's the Victoria Langford now? Ma'am, I've met the CEO at a company party once. You are definitely not her." The notion of her attending a branch party in designer attire had apparently calcified in their minds as the one and only image of her. Victoria realized too late that in this moment, her decision to dress down had backfired spectacularly. She tried to remain composed, explaining that she had arrived incognito on purpose and needed to discreetly withdraw $75,000 from one of the high-level corporate accounts. At this, Keith's eyes narrowed and Marcy's hand disappeared under the desk to press the security alert. Within moments, a security guard arrived, tall, stocky, visibly tense. "We have a situation?" he asked, glancing between Victoria and the tellers. Marcy leaned in and whispered something quickly, prompting the guard to step forward with a rehearsed tone. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the counter and come with me." Victoria held up her hands. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to access my own funds." But the guard's expression remained unreadable. "We'll sort it out in the office. Please, don't make this difficult." Customers had begun trickling in now, their heads turning toward the commotion. Whispers circulated. A few took out phones. Victoria, now both frustrated and astonished, tried one last time to de-escalate. "You're making a huge mistake. I am the CEO of Langford Financial Group. I need to speak with your branch director immediately." But the security guard guided her away from the counter with gentle but firm insistence, ushering her toward a side office like a problem to be contained. Behind her, Marcy muttered to Keith, "These scammers are getting bold." As the door closed behind her, Victoria sat in a sterile conference room chair, staring at the logo she had personally designed for the company a decade ago now etched onto the frosted glass. She took out her phone to call her executive assistant, but before she could dial, the branch manager, Donna Welch, swept into the room with a clipboard and a forced smile. "So, I hear you've been causing a little scene this morning," Donna said as she sat down, not even waiting for a greeting. Victoria exhaled slowly, fighting the boiling mix of disbelief and anger. "You've all treated me like a criminal," she said quietly. "All because I'm not wearing a pantsuit and pearls." Donna offered a tight, condescending chuckle. "We have protocols for a reason, ma'am. If you're not who you say you are, you understand we have to protect our clients." "And if I am who I say I am?" Victoria asked, locking eyes with her. "What's your recourse then?" Donna shrugged. "If that turns out to be true, I'm sure corporate will apologize. But until then, let's keep this civil." That was the final straw. Victoria had always believed in grace under pressure, but this was something else. The people she had entrusted to serve her customers were not only failing, they were disrespecting the very leadership that kept their lights on. She straightened her shoulders and took a slow breath. "You'll find out soon enough," she said, a glint of steel in her eyes. "I just hope you remember everything you said here today." Outside the door, more murmurs gathered, and the sound of a phone ringing somewhere near the front signaled the beginning of a very sudden shift in power. But for now, in that cold little room, Victoria Langford sat poised, silent, and ready to bring the full weight of leadership down on a team that had forgotten who they worked for. Outside the glass-walled office where Victoria Langford sat simmering, the tension in the lobby thickened with every passing minute as employees whispered amongst themselves and curious customers leaned in to catch fragments of the unfolding drama. Donna Welch, the branch manager who had so confidently brushed off Victoria's claims, returned to the front desk with a smug expression, muttering under her breath about crazy imposters. Marcy and Keith hovered nearby, both visibly pleased with themselves for flagging what they believed to be a security threat. The narrative they'd constructed, that a woman pretending to be the CEO had attempted a suspicious withdrawal, was now spreading through the staff like wildfire. Meanwhile, the security guard stood near the office door, arms crossed, occasionally peeking inside as if expecting Victoria to make a sudden move. But Victoria remained seated, calm yet coiled, her phone still untouched, waiting not because she lacked resources, but because she wanted every person in that branch to expose their true colors before the hammer dropped. She had spent years building a corporate culture of professionalism, discretion, and customer-first service, and to witness this theater of arrogance unfold in her own bank was nothing short of heartbreaking. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the doors opened fully to the public, and the lobby began to fill with regular patrons. Businessmen on coffee breaks, elderly retirees looking to deposit pension checks, young professionals checking on wire transfers. They walked into a space buzzing with nervous energy, greeted by forced smiles and a thin veil of politeness from staff still high on their perceived heroism. A few customers asked what had happened, pointing toward the office where Victoria sat, and the responses varied from "just a fraud case we're handling" to "someone tried to impersonate a high-level exec." The employees were proud of their vigilance, not realizing how close they were to burning their entire careers to the ground. Inside the office, Victoria heard every word. The walls, though designed to muffle sound, couldn't drown out the rising tide of ignorance. She took mental notes, names, phrases, tones, cataloging every misstep with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an incision. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. But her disappointment grew heavier by the second. Donna returned 15 minutes later, this time with a more serious expression, holding a tablet that displayed the bank's internal verification system. "So, I checked the employee database," she began, her voice slightly less smug, "and your name does match someone in corporate, but your photo doesn't match our file." She turned the tablet toward Victoria, who glanced at a 10-year-old picture of herself from the early days of her leadership. Polished, posed, with a severe bun and a Navy power suit. The woman in the image looked like a stock photo version of a CEO. "I've updated my appearance over the years," Victoria replied coolly. "I don't wear the same hairstyle every day for a decade. I also don't have to justify my wardrobe to you." Donna crossed her arms, unconvinced. Still doesn't prove anything. Anyone could Google your name and print a fake badge. I need corporate confirmation before we even consider giving you access to the account. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You want corporate confirmation? She asked slowly, standing up for the first time. Fine. You'll get it. With that, she finally took out her phone, tapped once, and held it to her ear. The room was silent as the line connected almost instantly. Yes, it's Victoria. I need you to issue a full-level verification and transfer protocol to the Midtown branch right now. Flag it under breach escalation, priority 1. Donna paled. That protocol code was reserved only for the highest levels of internal alerts, typically used when a top executive was being impersonated or endangered. But Victoria continued, unfazed. Yes, I'll remain in the office until I receive confirmation from your end. Also, alert Marcus in legal. I want this entire interaction documented. As she hung up, Donna's fake smile disintegrated. She now stared at Victoria not as an annoyance or con artist, but as someone who had just spoken directly to the executive board without hesitation, and used language only someone deeply embedded in the company's upper echelon could possibly know. Back in the lobby, the atmosphere shifted abruptly when the district regional director, Sam Braddock, burst through the door, red-faced and flustered, his phone still pressed to his ear. Where is she? He barked to the receptionist, scanning the room. Keith pointed cautiously toward the side office. Braddock didn't even acknowledge him. He marched across the lobby, opened the door, and froze in place when he saw Victoria standing calmly inside. Oh my God, Victoria, what happened? He asked, stepping forward with real panic in his eyes. Are you okay? Donna, now visibly sweating, tried to interject. Mr. Braddock, we didn't realize she was who she said she was. She didn't. But he cut her off with a glare that could freeze lava. You detained the CEO? He hissed. You pulled security on Victoria Langford? Donna shrank back, stammering. She didn't have an appointment, and she wasn't dressed like. Braddock held up a hand. Stop. Just stop talking. Outside the office, employees began to connect the dots. The scammer was their CEO. The woman they had mocked, dismissed, and questioned in front of a growing number of customers was the very person responsible for their paychecks, their benefits, their upward mobility. A wave of shame began to ripple through them. Marcy's hand trembled as she tried to click back into her terminal, suddenly unsure of how to behave. Keith, who had been loudly laughing minutes earlier, now sat quietly, staring at the floor. The security guard looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Braddock turned back to Victoria. I am so sorry. This is beyond unacceptable. You shouldn't have been treated this way. Victoria gave a small, cold smile. No, I shouldn't have, but I'm glad it happened. Because now I know exactly what my customers go through when they walk into this branch not wearing a suit or carrying a business card. She walked past Braddock into the lobby, now silent save for the soft beeping of transaction terminals and the echo of her footsteps. She stood in the center of the room, looked each employee in the eye, Marcy, Keith, Donna, the security guard, and let the silence settle like ash over a burned-out field. Every person in this room treated me like I was less than. You didn't ask questions. You didn't verify. You judged and assumed. You made a scene in front of our clients and shamed a woman you thought didn't belong here. I want each of you to think about what that means, not just for me, but for every customer who doesn't look the part, who's elderly, or foreign, or struggling. You didn't protect the bank today. You endangered it. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the customers, who now understood the full story, watched in stunned awe. Change is coming, she said, her voice razor-sharp, effective immediately. She turned and walked back into the office, where her phone was already ringing with follow-up confirmations from corporate. Behind her, the branch that had once buzzed with casual prejudice and careless laughter now sat hushed in dread, with employees realizing they had just become the architects of their own downfall. Donna Welch stood frozen in the middle of the bank lobby as reality began to crush the illusion she had so confidently clung to just moments before. Her expression a mixture of disbelief, embarrassment, and dawning fear as she watched Victoria Langford reclaim her rightful space with a grace that somehow made her fury feel even more dangerous. The employees who had mocked, doubted, and degraded her minutes earlier now couldn't even meet her gaze, each of them internally scrambling for excuses that might lighten the blow they knew was coming. But none of them dared speak aloud. Keith, whose smugness had earlier filled the room like a noxious cloud, now looked ashen and stiff, his jaw slightly clenched as if bracing for a verbal punch, while Marcy kept darting her eyes between her computer screen and the floor, unable to reconcile the woman in the comfortable sweater with the figurehead whose photo hung in a gold frame in the employee break room. Victoria didn't rush. She knew that silence was its own kind of power, that the longer the tension lingered, the more it would expose the moral fractures in the room, the more it would strip away the shallow professionalism these employees had clung to like costumes in a play. She walked slowly to the main desk, picked up a customer feedback form, and calmly tore it in half, her eyes never leaving Donna, who now took a step forward and opened her mouth as if to speak, only for Victoria to raise one hand to silence her. "I'm not interested in apologies," Victoria said clearly, her voice cutting through the hush like a scalpel, her tone so measured it was almost surgical. "Not from any of you." She paused just long enough to let the weight of her words sink in. "Apologies are what you offer when you spill someone's coffee or send an email too late. What happened here wasn't a mistake. It was a culture of arrogance, elitism, and assumption." Her eyes scanned the room again, lingering briefly on each staff member before resting again on Donna. "And it stops today." Before anyone could respond, she turned to Braddock, who was still standing awkwardly behind her, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. "Call the internal affairs liaison," she said crisply, "and get the regional HR head on a live video conference. We're doing this now." Donna looked like she might faint, but Victoria didn't offer her a chair, a moment, or even a shred of sympathy. She had extended patience earlier, had given them all the benefit of the doubt, and they had repaid it with mockery and humiliation. That era was over. Within minutes, a sleek corporate laptop had been set up in the side office, and the small conference table was surrounded by 5 of the branch's employees, including Donna, Keith, and Marcy, now visibly sweating beneath the stark overhead lighting. Victoria remained standing at the head of the table, her arms folded, her expression unreadable as the video call connected and the faces of the internal affairs team appeared on screen, joined by the stern visage of Clara Mendoza, the company's HR regional executive, whose presence alone signaled how grave the situation had become. "We're initiating a Category A conduct review," Victoria announced without preamble, nodding toward the camera. "All parties present are direct participants or witnesses to an incident of executive harassment, policy violation, and customer misconduct. I want this meeting on the record." Clara nodded solemnly. "Understood. Please proceed, Ms. Langford." What followed was a 20-minute monologue, calm, composed, but absolutely blistering, as Victoria detailed the chain of events from the moment she stepped foot into the branch to the moment Braddock arrived. She included names, quotes, timelines. She referenced training protocols that had been violated, security procedures that had been misused, and, most damning of all, the company's code of respect and inclusion, which every employee had signed and, by their actions, flagrantly disregarded. When she finished, the room was so silent it felt vacuum-sealed. Clara cleared her throat. "Given the severity of these violations, I recommend immediate administrative leave for the staff involved pending full investigation. Branch Manager Donna Welch will be removed from her duties effective immediately." Donna gasped audibly, her eyes welling with panic. "Please, Ms. Langford, I didn't know if I had known." Victoria cut in without a hint of sympathy. "But you didn't know because you didn't care to know. You didn't verify. You didn't listen. You saw someone who didn't match your idea of importance, and you treated them like a criminal. You may think I'm here to protect my pride, but I'm here to protect this brand, our customers, and the reputation we've built for a decade. You've endangered all 3. Keith shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I was just trying to help," he muttered. Victoria turned her gaze toward him like a spotlight. "You laughed," she said. "You mocked. You thought it was funny to strip a stranger of dignity in front of a crowd. What kind of help is that? The silence was shattered when Clara spoke again. I'll prepare official suspension letters and notify payroll. The Internal Review Board will contact each of you for individual statements. Victoria nodded and closed the laptop, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you, she said. I'll stay to brief the interim branch supervisor myself. With that, she turned her back to the stunned, pale-faced employees and walked out of the office, her composure as smooth as glass but her fury still visible in every deliberate step. In the lobby, Braddock pulled her aside. I had no idea it was this bad, he said, his voice low. We've had complaints about this team before, but nothing ever seemed this systemic. Victoria didn't reply immediately. She looked around at the customers, some still lingering, some cautiously continuing their business. Then back at Braddock. It's not just this team, she said. This is a symptom. The disease is deeper. We've created a hierarchy of respect that's based on appearances, and today, it bared its teeth. By midday, word had spread to every regional office, every department head, every corporate Slack channel. The CEO had been profiled and humiliated at her own bank. The video call had been recorded, and although it wasn't publicly distributed, quotes began circulating internally, including the now infamous line, "You didn't protect the bank today. You endangered it." For some, it was a warning. For others, a rallying cry. In less than 3 hours, Victoria had shaken the ground beneath a branch that had grown complacent. And she wasn't done yet. She gathered the remaining staff in the employee lounge, those who had stayed silent during the incident, some of whom had tried, timidly, to advocate for her when things escalated, and addressed them plainly. You're not off the hook just because you didn't speak up, she told them. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. But I believe in second chances, and some of you may earn that. Starting today, this branch will operate under direct corporate oversight until we rebuild the culture from the ground up. If you're not ready for that, the door is right there. No one moved. No one dared. Because they knew this was more than a lecture, it was the start of a reckoning. Victoria didn't threaten. She didn't grandstand. She simply told the truth with enough weight behind her words to shake every smug assumption out of the room. As she exited the building that afternoon, stepping into the crisp city air, the sun hit her face with a clarity that felt almost symbolic. She had come for a withdrawal, and she had left with something much greater, the truth. And that truth was about to ignite a transformation far beyond the glass walls of a single bank branch. Victoria Langford didn't waste a single moment after stepping out of the midtown branch, her heels clicking against the concrete with precise intent as she slid into the back seat of her waiting company car and opened her laptop before the driver even merged onto the avenue. The events of the morning weren't just a personal affront. They were a symptom of an internal rot she now had no choice but to confront head-on, and she intended to excise every trace of it with the precision of a surgeon and the intensity of a general going to war. By the time she returned to Langford Financial Group's global headquarters 30 blocks uptown, she had already summoned the heads of compliance, internal audit, human capital, and customer experience to her office for an emergency meeting, issuing directives through secure channels with clipped efficiency. The boardroom was packed by noon, a rare and urgent gathering that sent whispers racing through the upper floors of the skyscraper like an electric current, as executives who normally basked in calm control now scrambled to decipher what crisis had brought the CEO down from her usual perch and into direct operational command. Victoria entered the room with her executive assistant silently in tow, tossed her coat onto a chair, and turned to face the team with eyes that blazed with restrained fury. There has been a failure, she began, her voice even but unmistakably sharp. Not just in a branch, not just in customer service, but in our culture, in our training, and in our leadership. She paused long enough to ensure no one interrupted. This morning, I was profiled and denied access to my own funds at our midtown flagship branch. I was accused of impersonation, detained by security, and publicly humiliated because I wasn't wearing a blazer and pearls. The room fell into stunned silence. A few exchanged wide-eyed looks, unsure whether to ask questions or offer apologies, but Victoria gave them no space for either. I allowed the incident to play out, she continued, Because I needed to see for myself what our customers endure when they don't look like they belong. What I witnessed was worse than negligence. It was willful disrespect, disguised as protocol. She tapped a button on her remote, and a screen behind her came to life with stills from the branch's internal security footage, showing her being escorted to the office, flanked by the guard, her ID badge ignored, her presence diminished. This wasn't about identity verification, she said. This was about ego, about ignorance. And now it's about accountability. Within the hour, she had launched a surprise internal audit that would span every branch in the country, beginning with a direct evaluation of how frontline employees interacted with customers across a range of scenarios. Teams would go in undercover, senior executives, interns, external consultants, even Victoria herself, posing as everyday patrons to document how they were treated, what assumptions were made, and whether those interactions reflected the company's publicly touted values. "We are not looking for scripted kindness," she told the room. "We are looking for authenticity, respect, humanity." Her directives were clear. Within 72 hours, every regional manager was to submit a full report detailing how customer service evaluations had been handled over the past 6 months, with a specific focus on complaints that had been dismissed, ignored, or minimized. Compliance would be conducting forensic reviews of those cases, and every disciplinary record, especially repeat offenders, would be reopened for reassessment. The tone in the room had shifted from shock to action, but Victoria wasn't done. She turned to the head of human capital, a tall woman named Nia Alvarez, known for her empathetic but firm leadership style. "We're scrapping the old training modules," Victoria announced. "I want new curriculum built from the ground up, mandatory for every employee, from tellers to regional VPs. We're going to rebuild what it means to serve, what it means to lead, and what it means to see the humanity in every person who walks through our doors." Nia nodded quickly, already jotting down notes. "We'll bring in DEI experts, social psychologists, and frontline consultants. I want real-world scenarios, emotional intelligence training, accountability structures, and I want progress metrics that are more than vanity scores." Several other executives, including the head of technology, leaned in as Victoria shifted to the digital side of the equation. "We'll overhaul our customer verification systems. No more subjective discretion at the teller level. I want secure, biometric, and facial recognition integrations rolled out within 90 days. And they better work for everybody, not just people who fit some unspoken profile." The pace was relentless, but Victoria knew the only way to fix a broken system was to confront it without flinching. She called for an immediate freeze on promotions in customer-facing roles until the new training was completed, and initiated a new policy requiring quarterly listening sessions with real customers. Anonymous, unfiltered, and mandatory for every branch manager. "We've been measuring efficiency," she said, "but we need to start measuring decency." She also launched a hotline, directly routed through her executive assistant, where employees at every level could report toxic behavior, discrimination, or negligence without fear of retaliation. And for the first time, the company would institute what she called a mirror policy. Every employee who failed a respect audit would be required to sit down, in person, with a customer they had wronged and hear their story, face to face. "Accountability isn't about punishment," she said as the meeting drew to a close. "It's about transformation." By the time the sun began to dip behind the skyline, her directives had already begun echoing across regional channels, internal dashboards, and whispered conversations in hallways, as employees from New York to San Diego braced for the new regime. Some panicked, others celebrated. Many felt a combination of both. For Victoria, it wasn't about vengeance, it was about integrity. She hadn't built Langford Financial Group just to make money. She had built it to challenge the status quo, to offer financial empowerment with dignity. And if that vision had been eroded, even slightly, she would rebuild it from scratch. That night, she stayed late in her office, reviewing footage from other branches, combing through customer complaints that had been brushed aside, and making phone calls to frontline staff who had once written her personal letters about the pride they felt working under her name. "We've drifted," she whispered to herself, staring out over the lights of the city. "But we're coming back." Across the company, ripple effects became waves. Executives canceled vacations. Training firms were contracted. HR teams worked overtime building systems for tracking emotional intelligence metrics alongside financial ones. Victoria reviewed every step personally. Not out of mistrust, but because this time it was personal. This time it wasn't about branding or press optics. This was about the soul of the company. She knew she wouldn't catch every bad apple, but she could starve the environment that allowed them to thrive. And in doing so, she could plant something new, something better. Because when a CEO is profiled and disrespected in her own bank, it's not just a scandal. It's a signal. A signal that the company has forgotten who it serves. And Victoria Langford would never let that be forgotten again. The transformation of Langford Financial Group didn't remain contained within internal memos and closed-door boardroom briefings for long. Within a week, the shake-up Victoria Langford had unleashed began to reverberate through the entire financial industry, forcing executives from rival firms to sit up and pay attention as they realized a quiet revolution was taking root under their noses. The rapid restructuring sent a shockwave through banking circles as branches across the country received directives that stripped them of long-held autonomies, replacing outdated policies with strict behavioral codes, digital surveillance enhancements, and layers of psychological accountability that had never before existed in the world of banking. Regional managers, once insulated by tenure or quarterly performance, found themselves summoned to headquarters to answer for customer complaints long thought forgotten, while tellers and assistants were suddenly faced with live observation audits conducted by anonymous corporate agents posing as everyday clients. As Victoria had intended, no one knew when or where the next evaluation would happen, and that unpredictability forced authenticity to the surface. Staff could no longer rely on performance masks that only appeared when corporate came to town. A single misstep, even one spoken word of disrespect, was now cause for formal review, and word spread fast that the CEO herself was personally watching, listening, and acting. To ensure momentum didn't fade, Victoria scheduled surprise town halls via live video feed with different branches every week, never announcing which one would be next, catching teams off guard but offering them a rare chance to speak directly with her and voice concerns or ideas. At first, participation was timid. Some employees feared retaliation. Others worried they might say the wrong thing. But as more stories surfaced of Victoria publicly praising junior staff who showed moral courage, the fear gave way to cautious hope. When an assistant manager in a small Oklahoma branch spoke up about an overlooked accessibility issue that had gone unaddressed for years, Victoria didn't just listen. She deployed a facility renovation team within 72 hours and followed up with a handwritten thank you letter that was framed and placed in the branch's lobby. These acts of humility and responsiveness reshaped how employees viewed their leader. She wasn't a distant figurehead issuing mandates from an ivory tower. She was in the trenches with them, transforming critique into action. Soon, employees who had once stayed silent during injustices began reporting problems openly, advocating for vulnerable customers, and even policing their peers when behavior strayed from the company's new standard of respect. But it wasn't just internal dynamics that changed, customers noticed too. And they noticed quickly. Branches that had once been plagued by long wait times, dismissive tones, and robotic interactions began operating with new energy, as if the staff had been reminded that their roles were about people, not just protocols. Elderly clients reported that tellers now took extra time to explain account details. Immigrant customers shared stories of being offered service in their native languages without being condescended to. Single mothers, homeless individuals, and low-income clients, often overlooked or treated with skepticism, now received the same warm greetings and eye contact reserved for wealthy investors in tailored suits. Customer satisfaction scores surged within weeks, and positive testimonials flooded social media, prompting news outlets to pick up the story. Business journalists who had once dismissed Langford Financial Group as just another bank began publishing articles titled The Victoria Standard and What the Industry Can Learn from a CEO's Disguise. The story of her initial humiliation and her meteoric response became a case study in corporate ethics, discussed in MBA classrooms and management seminars, dissected not just for its leadership lessons, but for the humanity it injected into an otherwise sterile industry. Victoria didn't seek the spotlight, but the spotlight came anyway, especially after she made the bold decision to publish a public letter addressed to every customer we've failed. A raw and vulnerable piece that acknowledged systemic biases in banking and pledged a new era of transparency, humility, and progress. The letter was printed in major newspapers and posted on the bank's homepage, paired with a tool that allowed customers to submit stories of past mistreatment directly to her executive office. Tens of thousands responded, and Victoria made it her personal mission to read at least 100 stories a day, often responding with personalized letters, refunds, or in some cases, job offers to customers who had been denied financial opportunities due to discrimination. One such customer, a formerly incarcerated entrepreneur, had been denied a business loan 3 times by different banks, including Langford Financial, despite having a fully vetted plan and years of clean records. After reading his story, Victoria called him herself, approved the loan with competitive terms, and later invited him to speak at a corporate diversity summit. His speech, emotional and powerful, was live-streamed to every branch and marked a turning point in how employees saw the people they served, not as liabilities, but as living stories worthy of investment and dignity. Internally, the bank began instituting what they called empathy drills, immersive role-play sessions where employees would assume the identities of marginalized customers and walk through simulated service experiences from those perspectives. Staff were given personas: an undocumented immigrant with limited English, a disabled veteran struggling with PTSD, a single mother on the brink of eviction, and asked to navigate the banking system through those lenses, guided by facilitators trained in trauma-informed customer service. The exercises were emotionally exhausting but deeply transformative. People cried. People apologized. People realized, often for the first time, how much harm could be done in a single dismissive glance or poorly chosen word. Victoria participated in these drills herself, often anonymously, and afterward led intimate reflection sessions where employees shared what they'd learned and how it would change their work. The bank also launched an internal respect index, a real-time score visible to every team that measured not just efficiency and revenue, but empathy and inclusivity based on peer reviews, customer feedback, and observed behavior. Bonuses were restructured accordingly, with financial incentives tied to decency, not just digits. What truly set the initiative apart, though, was its scale and permanence. This wasn't a PR campaign. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't performative. Victoria wrote these changes into the company's operating DNA, redefined performance reviews, adjusted hiring practices, and even altered the company's mission statement to include the words, "To serve every person with equal dignity, whether they wear a tailored suit or tattered jeans." And while some longtime employees resisted and quietly exited, most stayed, compelled by the clarity of vision and the authenticity behind it. The bank began receiving awards not just for service, but for leadership, ethics, and innovation in corporate culture. And in a twist that surprised even Victoria, other banks started calling not to compete but to collaborate. CEOs from rival firms invited her to closed-door summits. Think tanks asked for consultations. Government officials reached out to discuss national standards for fair banking. In trying to fix her own house, Victoria had lit a torch that others now wanted to follow. But through it all, she remained grounded. She never forgot the sting of that morning in Midtown. Never forgot the way they looked at her, like she didn't belong. It fueled her, but it also humbled her. A reminder that no amount of status or wealth could protect anyone from prejudice in a system not designed for equity. She kept that memory close, like a scar beneath fine silk, invisible to others but never forgotten. Because in the end, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about public image. It was about responsibility, about leadership, and most of all about making sure that no customer, no matter how they looked, how they spoke, or how much they had, ever again walked into a Langford financial branch and felt like they didn't matter. Victoria Langford never saw herself as a crusader, yet as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the story of what had begun as a humiliating ordeal inside a Midtown bank branch transformed into a sweeping legacy that reached far beyond the walls of her corporation, igniting industry-wide conversations and challenging financial institutions to confront their own entrenched biases and outdated protocols. What had started as a corrective measure within Langford Financial Group evolved into something much larger, a movement built on visibility, empathy, and systemic accountability, led by a CEO who refused to let her power insulate her from the truth. After months of internal reform, successful training rollouts, and a noticeable uptick in customer satisfaction scores across every region, Victoria turned her focus outward, determined to share the hard-earned lessons and catalyze broader industry change. She began by assembling a roundtable of CEOs, compliance officers, and ethics experts from other major banks, credit unions, and fintech startups, bringing them together for a closed-door summit aptly titled, Respect Over Revenue. It was there, in a minimalist conference room lined with city views and tension-filled silence, that Victoria shared the footage of her own mistreatment, pressed pause, and let the image of her being escorted out by security speak for itself before asking one piercing question. How many of your customers go through this every day without a camera, a title, or a voice? The summit marked a turning point, as leaders who had once dismissed such concerns as isolated incidents were now forced to grapple with the evidence that their own organizations might be breeding similar cultures of exclusion and arrogance. Several companies agreed, on the spot, to adopt Langford's internal training modules and customer accountability structures, while others pledged to overhaul their disciplinary procedures to prioritize behavior and values as highly as financial performance. Inspired by the success of her internal mirror policy, Victoria proposed an industry-wide certification system called the Human Banking Standard, a voluntary but rigorous evaluation process that measured how financial institutions treated vulnerable populations, handled complaints, and embedded equity into their services. The idea gained traction quickly, backed by consumer advocacy groups and grassroots organizers who had long fought for ethical treatment within the banking system but never had the corporate allyship to push it forward. Soon, third-party auditors began developing the framework for the Human Banking Standard, with Langford Financial being the first to undergo and proudly pass the full evaluation. Meanwhile, Victoria doubled down on her grassroots outreach. She launched the Equal Access Fund, a multimillion-dollar philanthropic initiative underwritten by the company's highest quarterly earnings in years, dedicated to supporting customers who had been historically underserved or mistreated by traditional banking institutions. The fund provided financial literacy programs, community grants, and loan guarantees to marginalized entrepreneurs, renters denied housing due to credit profiling, and students navigating the loan system for the first time. But perhaps most impressively, it funded legal aid for customers who had experienced discrimination within the banking industry, regardless of which company had been responsible. Justice isn't proprietary, Victoria said during the fund's launch speech, which was broadcast live across all major financial media networks. Her message was clear. Ethics had no competition. A rising tide of dignity lifted all boats. This open-handed leadership earned her allies in unlikely places, from activist circles to small-town mayors, all drawn to the authenticity of her approach and the substance behind her promises. Internally, Langford Financial had never been stronger. Employee retention surged, customer loyalty deepened, and investor confidence reached record highs. Not despite Victoria's reforms, but because of them. Analysts who had once worried that the company's moral pivot would hurt the bottom line now hailed her as a visionary who proved that ethics and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. New branches were opening in communities previously overlooked due to outdated demographic models, and those communities, in turn, responded with overwhelming loyalty and trust. A branch opened in Southside Chicago staffed with bilingual tellers, and local hires outperformed every forecasted projection. Another in a low-income corridor of New Orleans became a case study in trauma-informed customer service. These were not just success stories, they were blueprints, and Victoria made sure they were shared openly with any competitor or regulator who asked. For her, withholding the formula for change would have been as unethical as the injustice that sparked it. By the time the one-year anniversary of the Midtown incident arrived, Victoria was no longer just the CEO of a major bank. She had become a symbol of principled leadership, a rare example of someone who didn't just talk about accountability but lived it, even when it came at personal cost. On that anniversary morning, she returned, quietly and without press, to the same Midtown branch where it all began, though the branch itself was nearly unrecognizable now. It had been remodeled with open seating, accessibility-friendly layouts, multilingual signage, and even a community board featuring local events and small business spotlights. More importantly, the staff had changed, not just in personnel but in energy, in awareness, in tone. The branch's new manager, a sharp and empathetic woman named Elise, greeted Victoria not with fanfare, but with an unforced warmth and mutual respect that spoke volumes. Victoria waited in line like everyone else, watching interactions between customers and staff, smiling at the moments of patience and kindness that had once been so painfully absent. When it was her turn, she stepped up to the counter and simply asked to withdraw a modest amount, and the teller, who didn't recognize her, handled the request with a professionalism that made Victoria's chest tighten with pride. After completing her transaction, she slipped a sealed envelope to the teller. Inside was a note. "Thank you for reminding me what this place was always supposed to be." Then she exited into the spring sunlight, feeling lighter than she had in months. That evening, she returned to headquarters to review the latest audit results, which confirmed a dramatic 92% increase in respectful client interactions across all branches. A tangible sign that the culture shift was not just real, but sustainable. Still, she refused to celebrate prematurely. Change, she knew, was not a single decision but 1,000 small ones made consistently, even when no one was watching. She sent a brief memo to the entire company. "Let's never forget why we started this. Let's never stop becoming better." It was signed, simply, Victoria. As her legacy began to take root far beyond the walls of her organization, Victoria was invited to speak at universities, government panels, and global leadership summits, not as a banker, but as a changemaker. She accepted selectively, always returning to the same message: that real leadership is not about being the loudest in the room or the one with the biggest title, but about using your position to amplify truth, empower others, and right what's been wrong for too long. At one conference, a young woman stood during the Q&A and said, "You've changed banking. What will you change next?" Victoria smiled, thought for a moment, then said, "Whatever needs it most." That answer, simple and unpretentious, was picked up by the press and turned into a viral quote. But for Victoria, it wasn't about slogans. It was about action. And every action she took from that day forward carried the weight of her experience, the clarity of her vision, and the unwavering belief that dignity should never have to be earned.